It is so nice to be back in person. It is so nice to see actual faces, actual people on actual phones, which we actually don't mind you being on because we want you to share the love. We want you to hashtag the hell out of this conversation. We want you to spread some of the great insights and the excitement, the electric excitement about being back in New York City and why it's important to have someone come from SF, why it's important to have someone come from London and put your stake in the ground because you were already investing in entrepreneurs here or bringing entrepreneurs here. And therefore, it's interesting to hear your take. So thank you so much, both of you, for being here. And Martin, I want to start with you first and foremost about what is it right now that you thought, and I know actually you pitched this idea to Index like a decade ago. Finally, it became so impossible not to have an office here. Why?
Yeah, first of all, I think it shows the value of persistence in life. That really helps. I think the scene has grown just leaps and bounds, and it's reached a maturity stage which makes it unavoidable. We were chatting earlier, and I was saying, actually, the real question is why is it only now? I mean, it probably should have happened a few years back at least. As you said, we've been making investments here for more than a decade, and some of our bigger winners were already in New York. Datadog, Shardul obviously, who has been on the board of that company for almost a decade now. You mentioned Etsy, Squarespace, Cockroach, Wiz. I mean, so many of them. They just felt like, okay, you can cover it from, either London or San Francisco, but actually there is so much going on here that being on the ground is very obvious. The other thing that's changed as well is that because of that maturity for entrepreneurs outside of New York City, especially European and Israeli entrepreneurs who, have been our core audience for a very long time. That we started in Europe originally. 5 years ago, they would probably, when they wanted to enter the U.S. market, they would probably set up shop in the Valley because that's where the talent was, that's where the early adopters were, and nowadays, pretty much every single one of them is going to set up shop in New York City first because you have the customer, you have the talent, and it's just so much easier to manage from when the rest of your team is in Europe.
Shardul, you've just come from SF. What does it feel like coming to New York? Is this the death of SF and it's going to be no one's wanting to live there anymore, or is it something else as to why this is the birth of New York instead?
I think New York is the second largest tech hub in the world, right? 10,000 companies, $10 billion invested in the Bay Area. Well, Jason, before you leave, I just wanted to thank Jason, who had a baby a week ago, but is still here. I mean, that's what, don't try to sneak out. Thanks, Jason. But it's like it's the energy, right? People a week after having a baby are at events like these.
That's not always healthy. Just saying.
Yeah.
We asked for his partner's email to apologize on his behalf. But no, I think the Bay Area will remain an enormous market opportunity. That's important for Index. That's important for a set of entrepreneurs and companies. But as Martin mentioned, we've had over 20 investments in New York. It's nothing new for us. I wish we had the slide that you put together, like a place to live, a place to work.
They've aged really well.
It is
remarkably
beautiful.
well. Yeah.
But it was easy. I think the hardest part was making sure our entire organization didn't descend on New York at the same time because it's such an incredible city to live and participate in.
Well said. We're all here. We're all pretty convinced of the same fact. But you're speaking and preaching to the converted. Let's talk a little bit about some of the data that is there. You mentioned the 10 billion, and I was looking into it. It's astounding. I think about 100 billion is now being invested, being raised by VC in say a year in the Northeast, and that's actually only just a bit shy of what's happening on the West Coast. Are you thinking at the moment, Martin, that this is the right place to be? Who is coming with the money, and is that money going to stay as we enter some sort of downturn?
I think it's a natural. It's just I think it's a rebalancing of of the two coasts in some ways, which is just a natural phenomenon. I don't think Shardul's point. I don't think San Francisco and the Bay Area is going to disappear. There's a critical mass there that that will always be there. It's just that New York, the East Coast and New York in particular is catching up, and it's just getting to a level that's more commensurate with the economic power that lays in this region, which is one of the richest of the world actually.
And it's not just the money, but what infrastructure has been built here? Do you think made the tipping point to a certain extent?
Well, just on the money, if you don't mind. So what we observe over cycles, like we both have been with Index for over 12 years, so we've observed multiple market cycles. There is a change, not necessarily in capital supply, because folks like us will raise capital that gets invested over 10 years. So there's a wall of capital available. But there are two things that change. There are fewer tourist investors, and there's fewer tourist founders. And that makes a dramatic change in actually the activity day to day and what happens. In terms of the infrastructure, though, sorry to interject. In terms of infrastructure, I think one of the reasons we're so excited about Cornell is we think computer science will penetrate every single discipline that students embark upon at colleges, and Cornell will be one of the leading institutions behind that. So I studied biology and economics. My sister was a pre-med major. My brother was in finance. All three of us didn't have the opportunity that students have today, which is to have computer science embedded into their domains to bring technology to the next set of companies that they enjoy. So I think that's unique infrastructure to New York.
And what else makes it ripe to become a global capital of tech, if not the global capital of tech?
I think the talent is what's the most important part. Capital these days is fungible. Right? It's going to go where there is opportunity, and opportunity in the tech world is where the talent is. And I think that's what was lacking before is a generation of entrepreneurs and operators. It's not only entrepreneurs, it's also executives who had seen companies go from 0 to 30 billion plus, like Mongo and Datadog and many others. And you need to have that first generation of companies with people who have seen what real scale looks like and what it takes to go from 5 employees to 5,000 employees and billions in revenue and market cap to actually invest in the next generation of companies at the very earlier stages, but also join them when they need to scale. I think that's what the maturity of the ecosystem is about, is having these experienced hands who can then either invest, mentor, or join these earlier stage companies that are on this very fast ramping trajectory.
And so almost having fed and helped grow the Datadogs, the Whizzes, the first real areas of growth and success in New York at this moment, are you seeing those next generation of entrepreneurs already bearing fruit? Are they already wanting to build here, or are you seeing people move here and build at the moment? It doesn't matter which way around it comes.
Yeah, so we were fortunate about 10 years ago to invest in a company called Adolom, which is a security business out of Israel. The founders actually moved to the West Coast because the kind of rigid, prescriptive wisdom from venture capitalists was move to the West Coast, raise capital, find your customers, hire talent. The company, within the first few years, was acquired by Microsoft. And Satya Nadella made an unconventional decision to make the CEO of Adolom, Asaf Rappaport, the CEO of Microsoft Israel. This was a 29-year-old who was promoted to the head of a site when there were 25-year-old, sorry, Chaim, I'm not sure where you are in the audience, but there's like 25-year-old Microsoft veterans waiting in line, and they were passed over. In that experience, Asaf grew the security product line for Microsoft from 3 million to over $1 billion in 3 years. Like, talk about scale. Now, Microsoft has this amazing machinery to bring products to market. So you can imagine as a persistent venture organization, every 3 months we'd go to Israel, we'd go to museums with Asaf, like, when are you going to start your next business? January 16th, my birthday, 2 years ago, he's like, all right, it's time, let's go. Shardul, a couple things are going to be different this time. Number one, I'm going to move to New York. First time, right? Why? It's much more pragmatic to stay connected to the engineering product organization in Israel from New York than moving to San Francisco. Okay. Number two, the go-to-market talent is also here and available. Number three, addressing customers is now possible remotely. So from anywhere, they actually have a structural advantage of selling from New York or Israel versus trying to put feet on the street everywhere. So we invest. A week later, Asaf's like, we pivoted. I hope you're all right with that. So like business plans out the door. Martin's like squinting his eyes, Shardul really. In the next 6 months, they pivot 4 times. And then they become the fastest growing software company in history, growing from 1 to 100 million of ARR in 18 months. Wow. The amount of investment and energy and confidence and conviction, despite having a lot of data, is a function of shared success in the boardroom amongst these entrepreneurs as they've witnessed the successes that Martin is describing before. And so that opportunity is only possible now in New York. It wouldn't have been possible, again, like 5 years ago or now in San Francisco.
Of course, we're here a little bit of the cult that is Bloomberg is a successful tech company in and of itself in New York, thinking, oh, well, fintech's an obvious place that's going to be great in New York. But actually, what is it every industry group that you're looking at in New York? Where do you think some of the special areas are for you, Martin? Because you're a man who's looked across various industries. You've had such successes in delivery realm and then consumer-facing companies, but also in the data-facing ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think Shardul mentioned that computer science has spread out into every department at university, but also at every sector of the economy. And if you look at past successes in New York, they've been really across the board, right? You've had consumer companies, Etsy and Warby and Glossier and many other. You've had infrastructure or kind of DevOps businesses, Mongo, Datadog. You've had fintech businesses, obviously. I mean, Lending Club, historically, Ramp now. So you've really had pretty much every, many SaaS companies, many marketplaces. So you've really had, we focus on 5 main sectors, so kind of, enterprise, SaaS, fintech, marketplace, consumer, kind of overall. And those 5 have had huge successes here before. So you will find talent in these 5 categories that have, that are experts in those domains and that will be able to apply it, again. The one difference that I see from London, but it's not necessarily New York, although I think New York is pretty strong, is health tech, which is a sector that it doesn't really exist in Europe as such, and which I've observed in the US. There are entire firms built around that particular domain because obviously the 2 ecosystems are quite different. But apart from that, I think we're going to keep looking and seeing companies across our 5 main areas of focus without really a lot of discrimination.
How is it announcing this, celebrating? It was announced in May. You celebrated with an opening last week. The mayor is there. We're all deeply excited. But you're looking at an economy that is slowing. We're looking at money that is starting to be more reticent to invest. Are we seeing founders more reticent to build at the moment, or no? Shardul?
Yeah, happy to take that. I think there are a few different types of companies. Again, the history of downturns has taught us that the best companies separate themselves from the rest of the pack in these moments. And so I happen to be involved with a couple companies that are category leaders in their business. And the conversation is attack. It's to be extremely aggressive when the competition may pull back because the product is differentiated, the go-to-market is effective, the pain is necessary structurally to address in a market. And so there's actually a phenomenal opportunity to extend leadership. And there are companies that you might think back to. Salesforce, right, reduced its expenditures, reduced its sales around 2008, and wasn't able to reaccelerate its growth as a consequence. So there are clear examples of companies that could have taken a more aggressive approach and had not. Those are really energizing discussions to be a part of, and there's a few of those across our portfolio. There's certainly a second set of companies that have a different reality. As one example, I serve on the board of a company where effectively the cost of acquisition of customers has gone up and the lifetime value of customers has gone down, which are like not good recipes for economics of the business. So we have to have a honest conversation where our role is to be a mirror. And sometimes perspective that's clear is not wanted, but it's really needed. And our objective is to give a perspective for an entrepreneur to make a decision. So I think it's a moment or a period where we don't have a crystal ball to determine how deep or how long a downturn might be, but it really allows leaders to stand out. It really allows individuals to focus on the opportunity cost of their time and rewards people that are decisive.
And the only thing I would say, so Shardul mentioned the existing companies. You also asked about, I think, the new company creation and new entrepreneurs. And I think here, we've already made, I think, 3 seed investments since moving here. So definitely we are seeing company. I think we are seeing less volume, but higher quality. Because in 2021, if you were a PM at Stripe, you would put LinkedIn working on something new, you would get a $10 million check mailed to your house, right? I mean, that was literally the reality of the world. So. And downside. What was the downside? Like you had $10 million to play with something and build something cool. And if it worked, fantastic. If it didn't, you would go back to Stripe or to some other place. I think that reality has changed a little bit, and so we see less one-uppreneurs, and we see the people now who are taking those risks and making that jump because it's a real risk and it's got consequences. Or people who have been put on this earth to pursue the business that they are doing. Which are, funnily enough, the people we really want to work with. Yeah. So it's actually made in a way our job, quite a little bit easier because just the quality that we see.
I don't think our job is easy. Sorry.
Easier.
But talk about the ease of the job and not, as the case may be, because it's a competitive space. And before you were posting checks through the mail because you were desperate to find the talent at the right moment
we
before
not doing
everyone
that, just
else.
To be clear, I'm talking
glad
about
that Index wasn't leading that charge. Yeah. But the nice anecdotal, fictitious examples aside, Shardul, are we now at a moment? What's it like in New York in terms of competition for the talent? You've put your stake in the ground, but lots of other VCs, and also there's a lot of private equity money here that's keen to look at new and different areas. How does it feel in terms of finding the right entrepreneur right now?
Yeah, I think most other firms probably think about the unit of measure in their business as a deal. We think about the unit of measure in a business as a reference, which is obviously a facet of an individual. So we really think about the relationships that we can form with individuals across our offices as one team, and as domain experts, the 5 domains that Martin alluded to. As a consequence, we can come with a prepared mind when we meet with somebody. We can be very decisive. We can deliver insight and perspective that's really differentiated. And so I think what's beautiful for entrepreneurs, and those of you who might start companies or have started companies already, is you have choice. I think that's a wonderful thing, right? In some areas, we may not be the best business partner for you. And that's totally fine. In many cases, we might be, and then we should absolutely talk. But the competition kind of on the ground, we think about a little bit differently. So on seed, where Martin described kind of 3 investments we've made, many of our peers, like the multi-stage funds, think about deals where they have significant ownership, right? So their seed strategy is to own 15 to 25% of a founder's business from the get-go. And they spend a lot of time depositioning other multi-stage funds. They deposition seed funds. They deposition operators and angels, like sharp elbows, right? Our view is different. We think seed funds, angels, ourselves, or other institutions, we all bring something different to the table. We have different skills. We have different competencies. And we think it takes a village. So for entrepreneurs, we encourage them to think about 3, I call them sleeves. My partners don't like that phrasing, so I'm working on marketing if anybody has tips. But we think about 3 kind of slots for seed investments. If I think about Footprint, a New York seed investment, or Bearworks, a set of Datadog alumni that are creating a company, the advice we give them is take institutional capital from us or a similar firm, take capital from a seed fund that can do different things, and take funds from angels. And as a consequence, we actually tend to cooperate far more with the local ecosystem that's been embedded here for many years versus compete.
Martin, just talk us through the local ecosystem, because when we were working more in Europe together, and I was watching Index just have success after success. The main hand-wringing that went on was the scaling capital. Like there was a decent amount of seed and angel money had come into the space. There'd been enough successful exits, but it was that next level of money. What's it look like here? Have we got every level of growth? Is there an ability to raise that fund here in New York?
Yeah, I mean, quite the ability. I think that's what's remarkable with the city, that you really have capital for every stage of the business and any type of business, really. From the seed fund, there are many of them, Bugs Group and Lehrer Hippo, and I mean, there's a long list of them. A lot of solo GPs or small seed groups. To the Series A, obviously we're here, Thrive, General Catalyst, and you got a lot of folks really, on the ground here. And then Series B, you got a lot of, Insight is already there as a massive growth fund, one of the most active in the world. And then, later on, you've got obviously the crossovers and even the more like asset managers, that all have huge presence here. I mean, this is, quite as you may know, there's a little bit of finance here. So a lot of that capital has migrated to tech because they realized tech was, as we've said, kind of irrigating every sector of the economy and was where the growth was going to come from. So you definitely don't have to go anywhere outside of here to be funded from the cradle to the IPO and beyond, because a lot of the public long only investors are based here as well. And I think that's clearly one of the huge assets of here.
What about, and what is fascinating, what I love so much about New York is its diversity, innate diversity within its population. Are you seeing that within its entrepreneurs as well, Shardul?
Do you have the stats in mind? Like we've done a kind of a review 12 months ago of the diversity amongst our founders across Index, and it's a standard for the industry. Specifically within New York, if I think about like Catherine Ryder at Maven, who's a phenomenal entrepreneur, used to be an investor at Index. There's so many really talented entrepreneurs, but to be honest, I don't know the stats off the top of my head. I don't know if you do.
I don't.
What about the worries that New York's really expensive? That it's really, the talent's therefore going to be really expensive. Is that an issue, Martin?
I think it is. It's interesting. I had breakfast with a very prolific angel investor this morning, and we were both raving about how fantastic New York was. And then there was always, but then something needs to happen with the cost of living situation because it's totally out of hand. And I think that's the biggest. It's funny. I'm going to share an anecdote of a friend of mine who is half French, half American. His wife is French. He used to live in New York. He used to have a startup here, was quite successful, but not massively successful. Moved back to Paris because he wanted to spend time there and started a company there. And now he's got 2 kids. And his wife, who's American, wanted to come back, and he wanted to come back as well. And he compared side by side between living in Paris and between living in New York on a seed, is at a seed stage, so very early stage, with some funding. So it's not, but he just couldn't afford it. And it was like, or at least nowhere near the similar kind of lifestyle that he was having in Paris, and so he decided to stay in Paris. So that's just like one individual anecdote, but I'm sure that anecdote you can probably multiply by a few hundred or a few thousand people who are entrepreneurs who really want to be here because it's an incredible city, just simply can't afford it. And yeah, I think if I were to point out that one particular threat or risk to the ecosystem is really that. The flip side of it is obviously that it does attract a certain type of people, and it's to the point about the one-uprunners and raising the bar. Just being able, especially for outsiders, immigrants. I think half of the people working in the tech industry in New York are foreigners or foreign-born. If you make it here, it really takes a special kind of grit and desire and persistence and ambition to just make the move. So already, it self-select for certain type of characters who tend to make, extraordinary entrepreneurs. But I still do think, I'm not a politician, and I have been here for 2 months, so I don't have a solution for the cost of living crisis.
You've had a word with Eric Adams. He's going to put in some changes.
I'm sure someone does have a solution, but I think clearly, it needs to be addressed, especially on the housing front.
Of course, you were having the mayor at your new launch event and party and celebrating, and what Eric Adams was meant to sort of bring to New York as well was an understanding of policing and an understanding of crime, and there's a lot of hand-wringing about that here as well. Has that bothered you at all since moving here, or become aware of, or something you're hearing from people, or no?
I have to say, first of all, I love the subway here. Like, I have so much fun. I get lost often, as like Martin notes. I have a horrible sense of direction, but I love the subway. I came out of the subway my first week in Manhattan, and I noticed something. There's an individual, I live on the Upper West Side, so I came out of the 72nd Broadway exit, and in the middle of Broadway, there's an individual who's like sitting in the middle of the street. And 2 police officers went up to him and like helped him up, put him on the side. They separated. One police officer went into Walgreens and brought him a pitcher of water. And I was stunned, because I had this bias coming in around New York police. The next week, I was in Central Park walking with my 4.5-year-old now daughter, and she wants like a Spider-Man popsicle. I'm like, yeah, of course, I'll get you a Spider-Man popsicle. Of course, I didn't bring a wallet, and so by the time I like opened the wrapper and put it in her mouth, they're like, we only take cash, and I'm like, uh-oh.
Yeah, that's a big problem, I have to say, versus SF.
and like the person behind me was like, I'll pay for it, I'll pay for you. And I was like stunned. Like, everybody in New York is so nice. So I've had so far.
Mention that to others. I mean, we should not lose our reputation.
Yeah, being hard ass, yeah.
I've heard lots of expletives. Don't worry. My first 2 months have been a honeymoon, and don't spoil it for me.
How about Martin? I know you're an avid cyclist, and I am too. It's my way I want to get about. How do you find just traversing the city and being here versus London, and building a family here, bringing young children as well, as Shardul has?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm still in the honeymoon period.
We're in fall, the leaves are turning, everyone's nice to each other.
His honeymoon, he's got a T-shirt that says "War on Cars."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I should have worn it today. Actually, I don't know why I didn't. But yeah, and just today I cycle. So I cycle everywhere. I cycled from our office in Tribeca all the way down to this place called New Lab, which is in the Navy Yard in Brooklyn. Then I had a meeting in Williamsburg, and then I came here all the way through on the east side of the river, then crossed the bridge where there's like this little gondola thing. And it was amazing infrastructure. So the cycling infrastructure is phenomenal. It could be improved, but it's already really damn good and a lot better than in London by quite some margin. And it was just an incredibly magical experience, with the vista and going above the water and I have this long bike where I put my daughters on the back of it, and so they they get to enjoy the street life in New York in a way that is just at that age they're just. They're commenting about the crazy thing that people do. I mean, some of them, rather they don't see, but that unfortunately you can't really control for that. But I think it's so stimulating for kids. And on the crime thing, I mean, people who have been here for a long time, do say that it's gotten worse and the sentiment of insecurity. So I surely believe that. I wasn't there before. But if you look at the stats, it is a lot lower than it was in the 90s, like lots. And it's also a lot lower than in most places in America. So mind you, that may not be the right standard. It is more violent, it is more dangerous than Europe. But that's because that's what America is. And I don't think that's in New York City. No, but it's a fact. It is a fact. But I don't think it's a New York problem. I think it's an America problem in many ways. And
well said. Yeah, no. Well, that's a cultural shock for some. What's been a more amusing cultural shock, apart from people buying you lollipops, which is unheard of? But what are you still trying to get your head around for SF versus New York? Like, what's the biggest thing that struck you, Shardul?
Well, we're open for business and we have money, but I went to the Central Park Zoo, and again with
you forgot your
I forgot my wallet, and I wanted to get these little pebbles to feed the goats and the lambs, right? They're super cute. I didn't have any money, and someone was like, "Here's 50 cents to buy yourself." And I was like, "This is fantastic!" Like, you know, we're not mailing checks.
No one was
People
paying
are
it
very
forward. No
generous.
one's buying your
It's like
coffee with having listened to some podcast about self-healing and SF. Or?
Density is off the charts
Yeah.
in New York. Walking, it's unbelievable. Food, like everything is available in such a small walk. We're 4 minutes from Central Park, 4 minutes from Hudson River. I don't cycle as quickly as Martin or with as much sense of direction, but I love it. You know, the density is for me the biggest difference between San Francisco and New York.
How about you, Martin versus London? What are the?
People are so chatty.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. They all
just
want to cheat. Don't get on a
unbelievable.
subway, otherwise you're.
It's just, it's amazing. You know, I love it. It's you know, like especially compared to London. I mean, you know, right? But
Yeah.
you know, the Brits are very guarded and very private, and you can't get out here like without talking to someone. It's just it's just impossible. Like people really come and talk to you, but I think that's a phenomenal. You know, it just makes you. I think that's also being on more serious note. I think that's what makes it a fantastic city for immigrants because you feel so welcome so quickly. Because it's very easy to at least have a sense of maybe not community straight away, but from just human connection and feeling welcome. And people don't really talk about that when you look at economic indicators and why is it a good city to live and whatnot. But that's actually quite important and makes your integration quite a lot easier than when you go to a place where folks may not be that friendly and not be willing to talk to you and not willing to engage. So I think that's a huge asset.
I agree, having lived that. We've got 9 minutes left. I want to start getting some food for thought from the audience, some questions. I'm sure there are some. If you do, please just ask a question rather than making a point, if you know what I mean. Otherwise, I will not be afraid to interject. But I think we have a question down here.
Sound check. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So I have a question for those who are looking to invest into companies or those who here might be looking for a job. What is one thing that attracts you to a business, and what is one red flag that will scare you away?
Ooh, good question. I think our business is more about finding green flags than red flags. We've noticed that we're systematically wrong on market size, as an example, right? So it's very easy to try to come to a conclusion around total addressable market and use that as the nature of defining the market opportunity, like consistently wrong. Who would have guessed a bookseller creates the greatest software company of all time? Right, the best entrepreneurs find adjacencies that are unimagined for entrepreneurs. In terms of green flags, I think, I'd be curious your perspective. Martin mentioned a phrase that we use internally quite a bit, which is this entrepreneur put on earth for this company? That sensibility around mission allows for perseverance and persistence through inevitable challenges in a company, and is connected to a lot of skill and leadership development, in market definition, and delivering an opinionated product to a number of different markets. So if there's one thing that stands out as a green flag, it's the nature of the entrepreneur.
Yeah, I mean, I will not answer your question, but I'm sorry. But I will just share an exercise that we did last week. We had a strategy offsite to the point of red flag versus green flag. And we used to do what we call postmortems, which is when an investment goes wrong, we would share, we share with the entire team why it went wrong, and we do like go really in detail of what happened. But then we realized actually, what it shares with the team is that, here is what goes wrong and here is what you need to avoid so that things don't go wrong, which is exactly the opposite of what we really want to share with the team. So we did the exact opposite the last time around. We did the entire portfolio approach, which is what are the phenomenal businesses we could have invested in sometimes, at seed, Series A, Series B, including Spotify, and many other, and which we didn't invest, and why we didn't invest, and how much money we didn't lose, but actually didn't make. It turns out that the money we didn't make on just one of those businesses is a lot more than all the money we've ever lost on all of the bad businesses we invested in. And so I think that's, to Shardul's point about it's about green flag, well, then about red flag, that's why. Um,
Another question. Yes, we have.
It's me, right?
Yes, it's you. Own it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming. So I have a question. So as partners at Index Venture, what are your some go-to strategy for startups to position themselves in the market? How do you help companies position themselves to market themselves, their products?
Must be very specific which industry it's in, or whether it's B2B or B2C.
You know, I'll try to give you an example.
Yeah.
So I joined the board of Datadog about 10 years ago when it was 8 employees, $10,000 of revenue. Like, they had a heartbeat, but not much else. And they started enjoying success. And in the board, there was conversation that, hey, our brand is not punching above or at our weight. So what are we going to do from a positioning standpoint? Because in enterprise software, the kind of conventional wisdom is you pay analysts and researchers to become part of the Gartner Quadrant or the Forrester Wave, and you may have heard of some of these terms in like software land. Datadog did something very different. They understood that their product sold to an individual practitioner, and so their marketing message was always understood by that practitioner. So it never had kind of the enterprise speak of we are like the data cloud, right, or this kind of marketecture, right, that resonates with a certain executive audience. They stayed true to always communicating with the practitioner who was the decision maker for their software. And it took a lot of effort and courage to be unconventional, but it's actually connected to how they enjoyed so much success in their marketing organization. To your point, like every kind of company and market is different depending on the nature of the buyer, the nature of the competition, but sometimes like unconventional thinking can really lead to breakouts.
Thank you so much.
And I think the way, also just to maybe add to it, is the way we work with entrepreneurs, just to clarify, is we're not operators of the business, right? I mean, entrepreneurs, that's why we pick entrepreneurs, because we trust them to build and run incredible businesses. So of course we're going to be, challenging them, we're going to be guiding them, we're going to give our opinion, but they will be the eventual decision maker. And the other way we help is also by surrounding them with the right people when they have difficult decisions to make. Whether that's surrounding them, as Shardul mentioned at the first, when we invest with angel investors or other operators to be investors, or later on it can be with mentors and with the right intros, with people who may have gone through the same journey and can provide a more experienced point of view to help them and help guide them through the decision-making process, rather than us telling, okay, this is how you're going to position your product, and that's the end of it.
You build an ecosystem, almost for them.
All right, thank you so much.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes, down here at the front.
We've talked about a lot of not so great things that have been going on recently, and we could name a few more: the pandemic, job losses, etc. Here at Bloomberg, we take our profits and we put it into our philanthropy so that we can do good in the world on like a small scale and a big scale. Now, naturally, you want to grow companies and help them be successful, get traction, make money. But how do you see the investments that you're making and the companies you're seeding or that you're growing also help solve some of these problems, big and small? How does that cross your mind, and how do you address it?
Multiple dimensions. Thank you for the question, and it's really meaningful to us. Part of our capital comes from limited partners, and we've been very intentional about the composition of our limited partners, such that the proportion of limited partners that are endowments and foundations, ENF, has increased substantially from fund cycle to fund cycle. There's work to be done there. I think the ENF industry is much more developed in the United States versus Europe. That's a Europe problem.
It is.
But that's one
We don't have
example
money.
where the profits from a great investment will go towards incredible cause. And we think about that also for selfish reasons. We think it's incredible to align our organization to recognize the day-to-day work that our admins are doing, that our ops team are doing, are connected to actually bringing real, tangible value to the ecosystems that we participate in. And that's just kind of like, there's multiple layers.
Yeah, that's the investment layer. What we are seeing, which is interesting, is that, again, we are about working with great entrepreneurs, and in a way, they are guiding us towards where we invest. And there's been a really big shift towards impact, either having a business with impact or embedding impact within their organization. So, for example, I'm on the board of a company called Personio, which is a HR software out of Munich, and they've already said it's a fairly large company, but it's not a public business yet, so it's still early in its journey. But they've already set up a foundation where they gave away 1% of the company to that foundation that invests in education and climate, essentially. So their product, you can argue, is it an impact business or not? It's an HR software, so yes, it's helpful to make to run companies, but already because the CEO and the team really cares about it, but also because they realize that it's become almost table stake to attract the very best talent, and we're seeing that over and over again. I've experienced people who now, for their second gig, wants to join something really meaningful and impactful. So I think that's only going to grow, and as a result, I think that's also where we're investing increasingly.
We want to thank all of you so much for your great questions, for your excitement, for your laughs, and for your interest. But please, let's give it up to two fantastic VCs, but now New Yorkers, who are going to make the city even more exciting place to be. So thank you, Shardul.
Thank you. Thank you.